So you've gone through your education, you've got into your audio visual side, but let's take a little bit of a step back and just take a little bit of a look at your parents. What sort of professions was your mum? Was probably a housewife, I'm assuming. But
Yes.
your dad, with all these things that you've done, was any of them linked to anything that your father did? Because sometimes, you find the sons tend to follow some sort of a route that the father's been on.
Not in my case.
Not in your
Other
case,
than
okay.
the practicality side of things, my dad came from a rural family originally. His father, my grandfather, was the manager of a stud farm
All right,
for
okay.
horse races.
Yeah, horse racing. Yeah.
Dad, when he came out of the army, because he did national service and stuff, and Suez and things like that, he was around in Egypt during the Suez crisis. He was a driving instructor for a firm in Chichester.
Oh, right, okay.
They all came there. Chichester is the hub, isn't it? I'm rather distantly related to the Sadlers of Chichester. Remember, there was Chichester Walk. Remember, there was Chichester Dog Biscuits, that big building that was on the bypasses who came in from the east.
Yeah.
And if you used to go to the Chichester Museum, the big panel wall there had some of the notaries, and the rather large Sadler nose was extremely evident in a lot of those pictures. So they're my ancestors. But we were always the poor branch.
Oh, right.
But I
know that feeling from both sides of my family. They've all had money going a couple of generations back, but it didn't come down to me.
Yeah, so the Sadlers were quite well to do, and some of them were, but our branch certainly wasn't. So yeah, they lived in Chichester. Dad was a driving instructor there. That's how he met my mum as a student. When they got married, or just before that they got married, he then got again, it's all, as you know, in rural communities, it is a certain amount of who you know rather than quite what you know.
Exactly.
So it was deemed that being a driving instructor probably wasn't particularly good a profession, and to support a wife and family. So they knew, my grandfather and other people knew of the family who owned a jewelry business. They were based in Angmering, and it was the Cundys. And they got him a job of manager of initially a shop in Cheltenham, but they were only there about 6 months, and then that got transferred to Worthing, and that was in May of 1957, and I rocked up in December. So that's how we ended up in Worthing. He was manager until his retirement of Wright's Jewellers in 54 South Street, opposite the Clock Tower, which is now a hair salon.
All right.
And he liked a little bit of photography as well. That got me into it. But I said he was fairly practical, though he seldom finished things. So he liked a bit of woodwork. But that didn't really, put me particularly in my direction. Mum had been a nurse. Her profession was nursing until she got married, and she then gave that up. She was going nursing at the Royal West in Chichester. Do you remember that? Royal West, which is now a posh block of flats, still the original building. Now it's
absolutely, fantastic building.
So that's where she was, and really loved that in there. That was her dream job, really. She loves looking after people.
Very admirable job. Yeah.
Yes. And actually, there were 4 of us in the family because her mother lived with us because she'd been widowed about 6 months before their wedding, which was at the very beginning of 1957. So I rocked up, 10 months afterwards. So he died in 56, summer of 56. So one thing and another, Mum came and stayed, which I think always caused problems, as you might imagine, particularly setting
Yeah,
up a new family home, and mother-in-law
yes,
comes with,
yeah, yeah.
and she was a dragon,
Oh,
and she wasn't the easiest person to get on with. It was a lot of stress and strain.
yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of how I got to be where I was at the art college, and then through to being into computers and technology,
Yeah. So
photography.
from the point where you left the job in London after about 7 years,
Mm.
where did you go from there?
Initially, I was going to tell. I rather fatuously claimed I was going to take early retirement.
Oh, right,
This was
okay.
in the mid '80s. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a reasonable sum of money to live off for a while, and I was going to do a lot of cycling. I boldly said I might cycle around the world because I've been reading lots of books of other people who've been cycling around the world, and I felt really motivated to do it. So I started cycling around large chunks of the UK, and I've cycled certainly from Worthing to Scotland, not all in one go, but in lots of different little bits going up. If you join them all together, there's very few gaps between it. And I greatly enjoyed doing that, but I didn't do the round the world cycle trip. Other interests, which I haven't mentioned yet, were to a certain extent geography and geology, which was the big disappointment at school because that was the main subject I wanted to do and the best teacher left.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing was history. We had a
Right.
pretty rubbish history teacher, but my Arcala in the Cub Scouts was a lovely lady who lived about 100 yards away from the old Malthouse cottages in Goring. Goring by Sea is where we were. And she used to tell me about the history of Goring, and because her dad had lived there since 1880 something or the other. I mean, he'd been there forever. And therefore could tell me all the old stuff that used to go on. And that got me fascinated in local history. And then my research is expanded on that, again with my photographic skills was useful because I could go and document and photograph what did survive. And I learned how to research, use libraries and stuff, and the Worthing Reference Library, finding all the old references to all the old buildings and all the old maps. And then history and then archaeology kind of followed. I joined the Worthing Archaeological Society. I did some various bits and pieces with them, which is mostly just lectures and talks and things. There was very little practical archaeology to do until I moved to London, which is a place I really didn't know. First place in South Ken, very near the museums actually. But one of the first things I used to do was at the weekends go off and wander around the City of London. And I then picked up. There used to be a local newspaper for the City of London. I think it's called the City Times or something, and it literally was for the City of London.
Yeah.
And there were two interesting things. One, I discovered that there was guided walks, which is kind of predictable for London, really. But and there was an archaeological society up there called the City of London Archaeological Society. So I joined the City of London Archaeological Society, which I'm still a member of after 40 odd years. And I went on all these blue badge guided walk things. I ended up going on nearly every single walk that certainly covered the City of London. They knew me by first name. I knew all them by first name.
Yeah.
You buy in bulk, it actually was quite cheap, and it was quite cheap in those days anyway. Just to learn my London, and particularly the City of London.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic. And also being part of the City of London Archaeological Society, before 1989, we were very, very, very lucky because the City of London Archaeological Society had been part of the foundation stones of the Museum of London, and the Museum of London's world-beating archaeological unit, which in those days was called the Department of Urban Archaeology. It's now called MOLA, I think now, Museum of London Archaeological Services, MOLAS, I think it's called now. But no, it was the DUA. And at the weekends, certainly on Sundays, they'd open up some of their key sites, and a bunch of us as volunteers would go in and be allowed to do archaeology.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The most premium Roman sites in this country.
Mm.
I have seen the original Roman bridge.
Wow.
I have worked on the original Roman quay, which ran along there, the first century quay, and many other sites. I mean, they're just breathtaking. And the wonderful Gus Milne, who you see on television popping up frequently, and the wonderful late Jeff Egan are the site directors who used to invite us on. And I just found this fascinating. History and archaeology was this thing that I wasn't aware of just how fascinating I found it and how interesting. I read lots, and I listened to lots, and I watched lots. There was a fabulous radio series called Origins, which used to do an audio visit to archaeology. That actually, I love sound. I love listening to the radio rather more than watching television. There was the famous television one was called Chronicle, which I'm sure you will remember.
The name.
Things like the Silbury Hill dig, live excavation into and under Silbury Hill. It was in '68, I think. With Magnus Magnusson and stuff. I used to hoover all this stuff up. So when I went off cycling back in the late '80s on my bike, you get to learn a lot about landscape archaeology because you're very aware of all the humps and bumps in the landscape if you're cycling up and down them. You learn that nearly all the youth hostels are at the top of the highest hills. But you can get to predict things. You get some inclination that you're going to be coming into the next village, because generally villages will be in valleys, because there'll be one water source, and there'll be a stream or a river running by. The church will be on the highest point of any little village that you go to. The main roads will be at the highest point, because the main roads don't get flooded. The low roads do, but the main roads don't. And you then discover and learn how the history of the country is developed, with from ancient trackways through to the A1, if you like. There is a reason why everything is there, and it's built on something that went before, that's built on something before that. And if you wipe the landscape back to its original form, you then think, well, where would I put a road, or where would I put a building, or where would I put a funeral monument, and you choose a place, and that's actually the place that they would have chosen, because that's the reason why everything works the way that it is. Of course, everything's modern world, so much of things are all covered up and lost, so it's hard to interpret. But the general formation of the landscape is always kept there. So landscape archaeology was and history was something I just sort of reveled in, and I used to cycle all over the place absorbing this. There was something exciting of cycling, putting your own effort into cycling to a castle. Going off and cycling somewhere else. I did Hadrian's Wall about 4 times in both directions. Each time exploring more finer and finer detail, getting the books, finding some nuances, some bit unusual feature here, and then deliberately going to find that one feature, going out of the way to do it. I just loved all that.
So you did all this, but I know you work at a school now. When is this the first school you've worked at, or have you worked at other schools? And are you doing audio visual stuff there?
Apart from students and summer jobs, I've only ever had 2 jobs. So it was the job at the Visual Connection, learning the audiovisual trade. I then was freelance for 25 years, traveling around the world, doing setting up events, being the audiovisual technician, the PowerPoint guru, and setting up the events, putting up the projection equipment and the sound equipment, and not so much the lighting. I was never interested in lighting. I could do a little bit of it, but the big events I didn't. But being a specialist in the projection and in the computer graphics. And we were living in London. I was living in London. I met my now wife nearly 30 years ago, I think. We married 10 years after we got together. And I was living in central London, and always had done at that time. in Wandsworth. So we got married. Then we had a year after we were married, actually on our first wedding anniversary, our first child arrived.
Oh, right.
Baby Emily,
Yeah.
17.5 years ago, rocked up. So we decided, as you do, that we didn't particularly want to bring up a child in London. Really. I mean, London's constantly changing.
Yeah.
The pressure on the schools, finding good schools and everything else. So we thought long and hard, and we decided we would move out. A whole bunch of choices: Chichester, Arundel. I mean, I was looking to my sort of home area. Probably not Worthing, for obvious reasons. You don't really want to necessarily return quite so early to your hometown.
Yeah.
But we ended up. We once stayed at a place called Forest Row near East Grinstead, which we really liked. So we rented. We didn't sell the house. We rented it out, and we rented a flat in Forest Row for a year to see if that worked. With me having the extra commute, because although most of my work generally was in London or within a train's journey of London, apart from the international stuff. Of course, being in London and a keen cyclist is the other thing I hadn't mentioned. I'm a keen cyclist, not a sporting cyclist. I'm a travelling cyclist. I cycle to get to places, not for competition. So I've always commuted on my bike, as I still do. And I could cycle anywhere in London, because generally it would be 10 miles there, 10 miles back, or less. The option of a tube or a bus. The bus service in those days were dirt cheap and very good, and all through the night. So that was easy. But then suddenly having an hour-long train journey and a best part of half an hour-long cycle journey to get to the station was meaning that I was passing myself coming home from work as I was going to work in the morning. And I may well be sleeping in my own bed, but the family would have been asleep a long time before I get home, and they'd be asleep a long time after I get up. And I spoke to a few other mates in the AV industry, and they said, well, I've got my daughters, and what about 9 now? I've probably only seen her for about 2 years, because you'd spend days, weeks, or months away, or you're there, but you don't see them. So I thought, this isn't working. So I decided to take up a trade like yourself. I became a tiler. I went on a course and learned how to do it properly. And there was a quite good training company that did all manner of different things in Crawley.
All right.
I went and did that and learned how to do it, and took the bold thing. As always, the first job. Oh, I'm going to make a mess of this. Without the paintbrush, am I going to make a mess of this wall or not? Am I going to make a mess of this tiled wall? And I took up tiling.
Right. Okay.
Walls, bathrooms, and kitchens, whatever. And I was about 2.5 years, getting to 3 years, just getting repeat work. So it takes a minimum of 3 years to get established, as you know.
It does, absolutely.
Need to learn your trade. Discover how not to waste money on advertising. It really doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Being swindled left, right, and rather. Oh, we'll guarantee you. Oh, yeah, spend all this money. We'll get you loads, and you get absolutely diddly squat.
That's it. Yeah. Hang on a minute. I'll pop off and get my T-shirt and show you what it means. I've got
that. And I was just getting somewhere when dear Robert Peston, then the BBC's financial editor, came on the radio, said, there are an awful lot of people queuing outside of a bank called Northern Rock in Newcastle upon Tyne trying to get their money out. We think there's something slightly wrong in the world of finance.
Right.
And of course, a greater percentage of a tiler's job, certainly my tiler job, was either doing up a property for it to be sold or doing up a property when it's just been bought.
Yeah.
And there were going to be no housing transactions taking place for the foreseeable future. No, indeed, it was just scary to see there were some houses being built just down the road from us. They literally just sealed up the site and left.
Yeah.
There was, why continue? Why spend any more money? Nobody could afford to pay for the materials. You couldn't get the materials to do anything. and nobody was going to buy the property when it was finished.
Exactly.
At the current rate of the chaos that was going on in was it 2007, wasn't it, 2008, something like that?
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And being a little startup with just about sort of making ends meet ish, and when all the work stops, what do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've been in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the missus whipped out a local newspaper one day and said, yeah, and showed me something. And there were 3 words that I never ever thought I'd see in the newspaper, because you don't, and the situation's vacant. And it occurred twice on the same page.
All right.
For 2 different schools. One was Tonbridge School and the other was Tunbridge Wells Grammar School for Boys. And it said audio visual technician. That's what I am. It's no good going on to the job centre and say, what you doing, what job you're looking for? I'm looking for an audio visual technician job. You won't get one. That's just it's too specialised.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. Therefore, you do not see it in a newspaper. And there it was twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tunbridge Wells Grammar School never got round to giving me an interview. Tunbridge did and offered me the job on the spot. I was far too overly qualified for them, but they needed someone, and that was it. And I started there in, was it 2008, I think, something. Working in a school, because I'd never done before. Looking after stuff that I was more than capable of looking after, but in a completely different way.
Because, yeah.
Just sort of managing and maintaining things, with a little bit of design and improving on the annual schedule that I have of upgrading stuff and bringing new stuff in. So we moved from overhead video projectors. Well, there were still old-fashioned few slide projectors, and those overhead projectors, the ones you can draw and acetate, and that project a big image. A few people were using those, but mostly it was the modern portable video projector that mounted in the ceiling. Of course, now it's all flat screen TVs, or touch screen interactive televisions now, of sort of 70, 80 plus inch. So I was involved in that, and I've sort of been there ever since, really. And then this last year, of course, where everything's gone virtual and online, they did furlough me for the first 2 months.
Yeah.
And my colleague whose job it was I took over, he moved into the video production side of things, originally for teaching media. That side of things changed a bit. But still he does a lot of the live events stuff. And I assist him where necessary. The school suddenly became a broadcaster, and of course now effectively the school is a broadcaster. All schools are broadcaster, because generally speaking all lessons are now live streamed to a remote audience of between 1 and half a dozen boys anywhere in the world, because I'm at an international private boarding school. Consequently, there are some boys in the world who can't get back because it's just too chaotic to do so, particularly if they're coming from a red zone country, because of all the quarantine and restrictions. That also you can't do that on your own if you're under 18, and of course some boys will be under 18, and that means you've got to have another adult to come and stay with them for the 2 weeks required, which just said that they stay wherever they are in the world, and they sit in and they watch their maths, the Latin, the whatever subject it is, which we're presenting to boys live in the room, and also live streaming as well. Plus, parents' evenings all have to be remote now. Yeah. And our biggest thing, of course, we're a private school. We've got to continuously sell ourselves to find the next customers, the parents of the young children who are looking for a school to send their child to.
Yeah, of course.
So we've devising more and more effective, and obviously competing with all the others like Westminster and Eton and all the others, a sort of quality, high-level product that make us look as kind of exciting and as professional and as fun, selling our unique wares.
Yeah. Yes,
So, you know,
it's a tough market, isn't it?
it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
It is. But you know, it's kind of what I do. It's actually, this is getting back more to what I used to do, because it's, you know, I'm live events is what I always love. We always normally do 1 or 2 big live events a year. Those of size, of scale. So it's just so nice to be able to design and all the sound and the camera stuff and make it all happen, because
yeah,
I
of course.
thrive on that live event.
Mm.
You know.